Hi, everyone. Welcome this Friday morning. And thanks for joining me wherever you are in South Africa and around the world. We go live on YouTube, LinkedIn, as well as Facebook page. And this morning, our focus is on accelerating intra-Africa trade. And I'm very glad to have my guest, Ronny Mkhwanazi, to join me in the studio. Ronny, how are you this morning?
Good morning, Kevin. I'm cold but surviving, so I'm great. Thank you for having me.
Thanks. Yeah, we are really into the winter period, and I see that in terms of weather forecast, is going to start raining later today in the afternoon, and then maybe for the next couple of days. So if you are in South Africa, please just take care, dress warmly, look after yourself, drink lots of hot water, and take vitamins to boost your immune system. But this morning, I'm very excited to have this session with Ronny. I've known Ronny for a few years. He's in the same building as I am, and I got to chat to him. And he's a corporate and trade lawyer, and he's a Nelson Mandela scholar. And when I look at his LinkedIn profile, I saw that he also, a few years ago, he did a certificate in finance investment. So Ronny, maybe in the future, you can consider financial advisor as your side hustle.
Certainly, I only remember the drunken man theory, Kevin.
and Ronny is also an entrepreneur. He's a founder and also partner of Mkhwanazi Inc. Attorneys. And he's really passionate about Africa trade, and he advises clients and promotes in terms of the discussions in terms of intra-Africa trade. So I'm very excited to have him with us in the studio. And I just want to just to start the discussion to say that according to Wikipedia, Africa is the world's second largest and the second most populous continent after Africa, with about 1.3 billion people. Africa's population is the youngest amongst all the continents, and is also the fastest growing in terms of population in the world. And Africa contains 54 states and 8 territories. It is full of mineral resources. So with that context, we can see Africa has got a huge population, is still growing, and soon it will match or even exceed the population of India and China. And with its young population, certainly it's a big market for trade and mineral resources. So lots of opportunities. We know that China has been in Africa actively for the last for a long time, and now also the Europe and Japan and America, they also, for the lack of better word, vying for opportunities and resources in Africa. And I think right now, as we go through the time of uncertainty and war in Ukraine, etc., there is a lot of disjoints in terms of the world supply, in terms of various commodities, resources, logistics, etc. And it's even more important for us to look at trade and how Africa, among the various nations, we can do business with each other and supply the goods. So it's really exciting for us to explore this topic. But I think that I'm also a member of the Africa Taiwanese Chamber of Commerce for many years. And I'm also the chair of the business promotions, business opportunities or promotion committee of the Africa Taiwanese Chamber of Commerce. So I became aware that on the African continent, many people may have the misconception, like if you want to do business in Africa, then just treat all the countries, all the people the same. But it's not the case. Every country is got its characteristics, dynamics, and culture and language, etc. And so we have an Anglophone country, we have a Francophone, and we have the Portuguese countries, etc. So it's really important that while we unpacked the intra-Africa trade and look at the opportunities, I think that it's important the audience needs to understand what it means to do business in each African country. Don't treat all the African countries just one, but every country's got its own dynamics, and it's important as you enter into a market, then you understand what it means. But without further ado, Ronny, that you are an expert in intra-Africa trade, and you're involved at the various levels in conference, and you have done a lot of talks on this. So I think it's really good to have you with us, and then also give us an update about intra-Africa trade and how we, as whether we are people in Africa or whether people outside of Africa can understand and the opportunities and how to set up their business for success in Africa. So Ronny, I'm going to just you have shared with this presentation slides with me. I'm going to just have it up and running. Yeah, so the floor is yours, Ronny.
Okay. Thank you very much, Kevin, for your very generous introduction and observations regarding what I've been doing on the continent. Everything starts with what we call the Agenda 2063, which is essentially the Africa agenda to create one continental market on the continent, and to basically ensure the free movement of persons, capital, goods, and services. And of course, this is important in order to deepen economic integration on the African continent. It's important for agricultural development, food security, quite topical, as you know, especially now.
Yes.
With what's going on with the Ukraine, and of course, industrialization and structural economic reforms is what Agenda 2063 wants to achieve. But it's obviously been very touch and go over the past few years, because the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, which has now been signed by all the member nations on the continent, is aimed towards achieving the objectives of Agenda 2063. Now, we know that across the world you have very many trade blocs, the EU being an example of that. And currently in Africa, for example, the challenge is that you have all these various regional blocs, which are at different development levels, and of course, as it were, up to the 2019 statistics show that the intra-Africa trade amongst African countries was only at 15%, right? And
sure.
Of course, for context, it's important to note that in the EU, also in terms of the 2019 statistics, it's sitting at 70%. So 15 and 70%, you realize is quite a huge gap in terms of trade. So there's still a lot of opportunity to exploit, intra-Africa trade, and that is what the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement was then aimed at, accelerating. So now, yes, of course, we have this agreement, and Kevin, if you maybe just move a few slides, I'll tell you where to stop.
Okay.
Yeah, keep going. Yes.
Yeah.
You'll see that's sort of like an organogram of some sort. Keep going.
Right. Okay.
Again, Kevin.
Wow, there's a lovely map.
Yeah. Again. Oh, I thought it's quite earlier in the present, but just go for it and you'll find it now. So what this will do is basically give you a snapshot of what this, Africa Continental Free Trade. There we go, Kevin.
Is this the one?
Yes, that's the one.
Okay.
Of what this agreement still needs to achieve. So you have the trade agreement, or the free trade area agreement, AFCFTA. It has to be underpinned by quite a few building blocks for it to be operational, right? So we all know that in a free trade agreement, there's various levels of trade you need to agree on. There's trade in goods, there's trade in services, issues relating to investments, intellectual property rights, and competition policies, right? So up to this point, the annexures that covers trade in goods, trade in services, and investments have to a large extent been agreed upon, right? And the issues which are usually very sensitive in free trade agreements is around intellectual property rights and competition policy. So there's no wonder that those agreements are still outstanding. So the protocols, as they call. So the protocol on competition policy is still outstanding. The protocol on intellectual property is still outstanding. So those will be then become phase 2 of the the Intra-Africa trade agreement that still needs to be finalized. So another good thing, Kevin, is that you cannot have a successful trade agreement if you don't deal with the issues of rules of origin, right? Which for most trade agreements is quite a controversial issue, and it usually lingers on long after the agreement has been signed, because rules of origin is like the passport of where the goods come from, right? So if I produce a good here in Johannesburg, where I'm now sitting, and it's fully produced in South Africa, and then I trade it with another African country in terms of the AFCFTA, it means that there will be, no tariffs payable on that, because in terms of the free trade agreement. So there's special rights that this, item will have by virtue of being part of the free trade area. Now, if you don't have the correct rules of origin, what then happens is that you find that people import, products from other parts of the world. So me in Johannesburg, once again, I import a product from Zimbabweland. It lands in South Africa. I just paint it to green, and then export it to another member in Africa as if it's a South African product. So then that defeats the whole purpose of why we should then have free trade, because we won't be able to know whether the goods qualify, and as a result, that may have a lot of economic disruptions and so on and so forth. So that is where we are now in terms of the Africa Free Trade Area Agreement. The rules of origin have been finalized, and I think that the rule was that for a product to qualify as a product coming from the continent, it must actually be 80%. Worked on the continent, whether manufactured here up to 80%, or imported, and 80% of work being done on the product for it to qualify under the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. So now we obviously the rules of origin was quite a challenge, because if you don't have that, you can't move on the agreement, right? So I'm happy that is resolved now, and of course looking forward to now seeing real business actually happening in terms of intra-Africa trade. If you just go to the next slide, Kevin. And here I just want to give the some facts around the continent and what happens there. By 2030, we'll be sitting at 1.7 billion citizens on the continent. We're currently at 1.2 billion, as you stated, Kevin. The investment in infrastructure, because that's the other key thing. You cannot have free trade areas or agreements, but you don't have the economic infrastructure to make sure that you are able to actually trade. So that is quite a huge challenge for Africa, as we all know. And of course, it's encouraging, because the investment in infrastructure in the continent has been increasing by up to $80 billion per annum since the beginning of the century we're currently in. There's tremendous opportunity for growth. You'll see as we go down what those opportunities are. Africa has the fastest growing middle class, and that number is expected to reach up to 1.1 billion people, which is 42% of the predicted population. You mentioned Africa still has the youngest population. Europe is suffering from a population dynamics. I think the same with Asia, where you have a more elderly population and so forth. So that really means that if you are indeed a future, oriented business leader, you should be wasting no time, but really going to Africa and do business there. And then, of course, Kevin, in terms of, I've already mentioned the opportunities and what is going to be there. There's huge scope for industrialization. In Africa, for example, you know that you have one major manufacturing hub on the continent, which is South Africa. And what would need to happen is to see an industrialization drive on all the countries in the continent to make sure that we manufacture goods here. And so forth. You mentioned, Kevin, in your introduction as well, that Africa is rich in minerals, but we all know that currently there's economic imbalances because, these minerals are basically, taken off the ground, put on a train, off to the port and to some part of the world. So that is one of the challenge why industrialization becomes so important, so that we can actually beneficiate our stuff here and make sure that it goes, it grows our economies. The infrastructure gap I've mentioned, we need a huge infrastructure drive. That is actually, for me, the alpha and omega of accelerating intra-Africa trade by actually accelerating, the infrastructure investment. Innovations relating to agricultural resources, once again, an issue of value propositions. I think Africa should aggressively be going into farming. In fact, I believe, Kevin, and this is a lawyer talking, right? I'm not an economist or an expert in finance, but I believe that on agriculture alone, if Africa could be able to feed the whole world by itself, on its own, we would still create prosperity for the continent. So there's a huge, interest and gap there that needs to be closed down. And of course, digital economy. So beautiful, Kevin. Since COVID, we talk to people all over the world every day. Which just 2 years ago, we had to fly all the way to Cape Town for 4 hours in a day just for a 1 hour meeting and fly back again. Fintech, the greatest inventions ever. People can now pay from wherever they can on the continent, on their mobile phones, on their laptops, wherever they are. Fintech is going to be, the greatest game changer in terms of, transactions on the continent. We've seen the mushrooming of very many tech companies. In fact, I was thinking the other day, Kevin, that it's interesting that right now, what's happening in South Africa in particular is that you see the retailers are actually now competing on apps, if you look on TV every day, they're no longer necessarily advertising that, a bottle of oil is cheaper, but they rather advertise their app, that our app can deliver food to you in 2 seconds and so on and so forth. So it really just shows you how tech is really impacting and is going to be a game changer in terms of intra-Africa trade. I think if you keep going down, Kevin, on the slide, you'll get to a place that says specific growth opportunities. There you are. And I think this is just to emphasize what I was talking about, food production. In Africa, there's lots of raw materials. Cocoa, Africa is the biggest producer of that. But probably the smallest producer in terms of producing chocolates, right? Because all the cocoa gets taken and is then exported to countries that make chocolate and so on and so forth. Solar energy, the buzzword all over the world right now. Africa, massive opportunity with our hot temperatures here. In South Africa, we're currently suffering from load shedding as a national crisis. But there are opportunities for solar energy to plug those kind of gaps and to accelerate, industrialization. Because if you don't have, proper energy supply, you won't be able to industrialize. They're really interconnected. I mean, you just have to look at the price of fuel currently, based on what's happening in the Ukraine. Once again, education, a big opportunity. In South Africa, for example, the middle class take their kids to private schools. There's a mushrooming of private schools as a result. And can you imagine that this is happening, all over the continent? And to make it even, to accelerate it even further, online schooling has now taken the world by storm. And that, again, is a huge opportunity in Africa to accelerate, knowledge, growth, leadership, and of course, industrialization. Because without education, you won't be able to have the workforce to execute your intra-Africa trade. Property, quite a big market in Africa. You see unfortunately now, of course, because of the COVID situation, most properties stand empty, in our country at least. But I'm sure that in time it will recover and it will continue to grow. I mean, I remember, Kevin, a few years ago, seeing that there's a shortage of about 500,000 beds for students, that is student accommodation, in SADC alone, right? 500,000. So beds that are still in short supply. So there's still a huge opportunity in that example, in that scenario. I've spoken about fintech, transport. You cannot move your goods across borders if you're, without transportation. So transporting solutions, one of the key growth opportunities in the African continent. Funding, we all need funding every day. I think I've seen there's a great move on the continent now of trying to incubate and create more, tech companies and so forth. So there's a great opportunity for wherever you are in the world. To seek out those opportunities to fund. There's a lot of innovation going up in the continent, Kevin. Every other day I bump into people, who have some form of innovation, but they don't have, the funding to conceptualize and go to business. So that's important. Healthcare services, I don't have to say a lot about that. COVID showed us, what happens if you have a poor healthcare service. And of course, that's a great opportunity for future pandemics. Maybe 2 years from now, maybe 100 years from now. So there will continue to be, a huge need, for Africa. Arts and crafts, things that I believe we're not investing in a lot. For example, we as Africans are so talented in terms of using their hands and designing all this beautiful craft. You pass them every day, Kevin, in our environment, where you get shocked that someone has designed a huge elephant from a drum, So I think those kind of things are the opportunities that Africa really needs to look into. How to, firstly protect our arts and crafts from an intellectual property point of view, but then how to commercialize it as well. And of course, on the back of that, link it to fintech, etc., to make sure that you are able to accelerate Intra-Africa trade. And then, of course, retail opportunities. People need to eat every day. Africa population is growing. It's the youngest population, as you've mentioned, Kevin. And you know as much as I do how much young people consume. So it means we'll continue having a huge demand for food. And the next slide, Kevin, then talks about apps. I've just spoken about that, how our industries, our retailers are competing on their apps. Payment solutions, waste management, huge challenge, even in advanced, countries like South Africa. We battle a lot with waste management and so forth. So you can imagine in the rest of the continent how we can start using waste effectively and sustainably to make sure that we don't overburden our continent and environment with pests. So in Ethiopia, for example, there's a project where they convert waste into generating electricity and so on. So I think, Kevin, in a nutshell, I hope I didn't say too much, but of course, I just, felt that those are the kind of things that you would, like us to talk about today. And of course, I'm open to any questions from your side. And it's great. But if you go maybe to slide 7, Kevin, I think this is slide 7, please. The one with the map you saw.
Okay, hold on a second. It's I think it's I need to just click on that left button many times to get to that slide.
I see. Okay.
Hold on a second.
I actually have a summary of this, Kev, but I really felt I wanted to give you everything today so that we don't leave any doubt.
Okay, so this is the one, right?
Yes, that's the one.
Okay.
The reason this snapshot is so important, and we have acknowledged the source there, Kevin. It's not a map that I created. So I would like to acknowledge the source there. It's just a snapshot, basically, of showing you the makeup of the African continent from a resource. A natural resource point of view. You'll see that the central and southern part of Africa mostly has precious metals and minerals. So those are your golds, your coal, platinum, and all those important things that we so much require in today's technology. Is mostly found in the center towards the south of Africa. If you look to the right of the map, the Horn of Africa, so to speak, you see there's more food or agricultural production, I would say there, because of
Yeah.
the coffee and Kenyan tea and so on. And as you
Mm.
go to the upper north of the continent and
Yeah.
towards the east of Africa, you see there's a high concentration of oil and gas. So I mean, what a well endowed, continent, Kevin.
Mm.
And
Sure.
you can just imagine that, in an ideal world, this is the kind of continent that should really, really be pumping from an, prosperity point of view. But I'm an eternal optimist that by working, by signing the AFCFTA and putting the blocks in place, we have started a great journey. And I would like to say, perhaps, Kevin, as well, that the challenge that I have now, insofar as the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement is that it appears and it still remains that business and governments are talking past each other, right? So you have all these beautiful lofty ideals that governments come up with plans, etc., of what they want to do, but they're talking to themselves because business is not in the same room with them having these discussions. And then the next thing what happens is that we see a minister of so and so announcing transactions that are worth $1 billion. But then everybody's surprised, where does this $1 billion come from? So we really need to find a way to close that gap because ultimately the people who do business are business people and governments are there to create the platform for business to be able to accelerate economic development in all of these countries. And therefore it's important that governments on the continent consider that very seriously. But that's not the only thing. The business people themselves, I also have challenges with them because for some strange reason we are still stuck in our national borders. We still think that our market is the 50 or 60 or 70, I don't know, million South Africans we have. Whilst in SADC alone, you have 300 million people, And I really think that business as well also needs to, take and play its role by making sure that it comes to the party, it challenges government in terms of the plans and whatever they have, bringing their resources, bringing their technical expertise, because we all know, governments are not business people. They are there to create the platform. So I think those two things are the key or one of the stumbling blocks that won't help us achieve the acceleration of intra-Africa trade. And I think, Kevin, that's a very important point that we really need to work on going forward.
Ronny, I think that this is a very lovely slide with a map and showing all these areas that anyone who's got a business mindset, if they want to explore, certainly they know where they can go to. But I think when you were talking about all these points, I certainly have a few questions or comments. I think the first one is that in terms of South African business people going to the rest of Africa to do business, I think that there's two camps. There's one camp that's being out there, but they got burnt. If we look at just Nigeria as a market, there was we saw that the likes of ShopRite, Woolworth, and maybe others that they didn't really get their way to be successful in a specific market. And then that's also speaks about do you actually understand the dynamics? Do you have a local partner that you work with, etc. But the other camp I saw is like I would say the South African business people who are just comfortable doing business in South Africa. They think that South Africa is probably the most advanced economy in Africa, and they feel like going to the other parts of Africa is going to be difficult, fraught with problems, issues, and that's why they just felt that stay in their comfort zone and work with the market they understand. But I think that certainly if we look at the rest of the other parts of Africa, there are countries who have been growing much faster than South Africa, and with the population and also with the foreign investment, or maybe their environment is more conducive for foreign investment, and where that's what caused them to also have been experiencing faster economic growth over the last 10-15 years. I think that for example, like Ethiopia, etc. So I think that's one thing I can think of. Then I think, Ronny, the other thing that you at the beginning of your presentation, you talked about the route of origin. I think that's quite important, especially for anyone who wants to supply or manufacture and then supply to the rest of Africa. Whether they want to use South Africa as a base and then to export, etc. That's probably very important to understand. I was just because I work with a lot of Chinese businesses in South Africa, and I can understand some of these dynamics. But I just want to give an example, and I just want to see how you see this this issue. So let's say, for example, a businessman may import the parts of a bicycle into South Africa. So then they will assemble those parts to be a fully functional bicycle, then sell in South Africa. And when it comes to exporting to the rest of Africa, how would that work? Because you're talking about 80% of that, but I think because of the supply chain and the manufacturing and all that, in Taiwan and China and maybe Vietnam, some other parts where the business will have to source most of the parts from overseas, and then to import here, and then assemble, and then to export. So in that case, would that be seen as a route of origin South Africa, or would it be actually like China?
Yeah. So this is a very scientific approach, Kevin. In fact, we I mean the firm Mkhwanazi Incorporated, we had a webinar talking about rules of origin, where we had one of the experts who after our webinar actually went to work for the AU, and she's the head of the rules of origin at the AU at the moment.
Wow. Okay.
One of the main consultants. So that was really a comprehensive, explanation, and of course people can find that on our website under our media page. But in that case, where there's only, as you state, the assembly of the product, what will then happen is that the customs, because remember, in that case where there's an inquiry, they would then want to know the whole production cycle of, where was this thing produced, how is it produced, and all of that. And the customs will then do a calculation and then decide that based on the value add that was made in the African country, what type of percentage would be allocated to that product, right? Okay. So it's not like you can just say, the parts arrived and then they were assembled and then it went through, because that also happens. It happens a lot. In fact, just out of interest, Kevin, I used to be a part-time commissioner at the International Trade Administration Commission, ITAC, in South Africa. And one of the matters that we dealt with was around the monitors, screen monitors.
Okay.
Because, when the flat screens started coming in, you could, in terms of the tariff lines, either import it as a monitor or import it as a television screen, right? So people would then look at which one has the lowest tariffs and then classify it as that. Or take out one or two components that makes it a television and then install that when it's in South Africa. So there's a lot of wheeling and dealing around this transaction. So what I'm saying is that what the advice I would give to importers is to make sure that before they actually ship these things, they already get a directive from South African customs, SARS, and then they will then tell you exactly how that is going to work. So you can, that it really is a scientific calculation that happens in that kind of instance. But regarding you mentioned the point as well, Kevin, when you say people want peace of mind instead of going to other countries and not knowing what's happening there, and maybe worrying as to whether their goods will arrive or not. So there's quite a few things to say on that. So in terms of legal, because what you're actually talking about are issues of regulatory compliance, the laws, how that works, and so on. So for example, most of the SADC countries, have a history of being England colonies, right? The colonies of England. So from a regulatory point of view, what I advise business people to always do is to say, if it's a former British colony, then common law basically applies, and so on. So you'd find that even in South Africa, Our most recently 1973, I think, Companies Act was based on the English Company Law Act, right?
Yeah.
And so most of the countries that are former colonies then have that kind of legislation. So you almost know that if I go there, more or less as South African, the rules are more or less, aligned to what we in South Africa do. So it sort of like gives an idea. Then, of course, you've got the Francophone countries,
Yeah.
your DRC and other countries, up north in the continent who have a Francophone, judicial system, which is completely different from the common law one. And in that case, what you then need to do is just to make sure you consult, lawyers who understand French law and get a better sense of, what the law says around that and so on, and to be able to safeguard yourself. But we also have a Portuguese legal system in South Africa. I mean, you have Angola and Mozambique. And in terms, just as to show you how different these laws are, in terms of common law, you are innocent until proven guilty, right?
Right.
But in terms of Portuguese law, you are guilty until proven innocent, right? So the burden of proof is when the accused.
Okay.
The burden of proof is when the accused. So it makes a huge difference because remember, innocent until proven guilty means that the state must prove beyond reasonable doubt that you committed the offense. But if it's guilty, until proven innocent, you have a responsibility to prove that you did not commit the offense, which is a higher burden of proof, So that's important to understand how those laws work. However, the way to resolve all of those challenges is to make sure that we then have what we do a harmonization of laws, right? Where all the countries that are member states of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement will then, have the same laws and the same rules. And so you know that when I'm doing a transaction in Nigeria or in Kenya or in Rwanda, I know what to expect. That's what you were talking about, Kev, that, business people want to know the rules and what to expect. So that's very important. So there is a drive on the continent, albeit a very slow one, to try and harmonize our laws. Because what you would need to do, for example, you'd have to review all the laws, say in telecoms, what is the telecoms legal environment? It's different completely perhaps from the French laws as opposed to common laws. And then you need to find a middle ground and have a directive to say this is what you're going to use. In the interim and in the absence of this type of harmonizations, we also have international instruments, mainly from the WTO insofar as trade is concerned. And these international instruments are then adopted by the member states to make them laws so that they can become applicable in their countries as well. So the one that comes to mind immediately is the Trade Facilitation Agreement. It's less than 5 years old, from the WTO, and that is meant to remove all the bottlenecks and bureaucracy at the border gates. And all the countries who are members of the WTO must now have what we call a single window. It's called a single window policy, which means that as a business person, if you have a dispute in a customs dispute at the border post, you shouldn't be going to SARS, then they tell you must go to the DTI, then go to the DTI, then they tell you must go to Treasury. There must be one-stop shop where your problem can be queried and resolved. And also the use of electronic documents, which is also important in accelerating intra-Africa trade. That is also in terms of the Trade Facilitation Agreement. And there's now a drive, not just in Africa, but throughout the world, for most of the countries to make sure that they implement and execute the agreements from the WTO. So in the interim, that's what helps us. But legal harmonization is going to be very critical in order to ensure that the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement becomes a success and we're able to accelerate intra-Africa trade.
Yeah, so from what you say, it sounds like there's still a lot of work to be done. It's a long road ahead. It's not just like magically when we wake up tomorrow that everything is just works. Ronny, so based on what you say, if it's someone from South Africa, because we are like common law here, so it sounds like maybe if you want to branch out to the rest of Africa, probably you first focus on the SADC region. but also maybe the other like English-speaking country, like maybe Kenya, the East African countries, where it might be easier. You understand how it works. Maybe it's from a legal system point of view, it's at least we can grasp that easier to do business with. Okay, then my next question is that if someone wants to export or do business in a certain country, what's the base way? What's the base route for that? Because if I think about the business, maybe they can set up a company there in that country, or they maybe find a local partner where it will be the agent, and where they can sell to that company or that the customer, and then that those customers then they sell or retail to the public. Yeah. So what do you see is the best way to enter other markets?
Yeah. Look, I think firstly you have to be a businessman, because I can't imagine someone just waking up and saying, okay, I want to now start trading in Zambia while he hasn't even traded in Pretoria. So you need to first obviously be in the game. But the first thing, obviously, I think in normal business speak, before someone goes into a new environment, firstly the commercials will be important for the business. So one would assume that you see a market and therefore you want to go, into that market. So if you want to go into Africa, I think the best way is to first establish and do a due diligence, firstly around the laws, to see how the laws may hinder you from progressing. So for example, what I mean by that is that most countries lately have what we call indigenization policies, which basically says that for you to get business in this country, you have to be owned by a local person to a certain percentage. So some, for example, like in Botswana, is 51%. But you find in other countries there's very different levels, right? In South Africa, we don't have what I would call indigenization laws, but we have broad-based Black empowerment laws. Which in other words doesn't impact on the ownership of the company to say you have to have a local person, in your business. But it merely says if you want to do business with the state, you need to have certain thresholds met for ownership by local people, either through ownership or through subcontracting. So for example, if you get points scored on a government contract based on your BEE, as we call it, your broad-based Black economic empowerment. So if you have 51% Black owned, that's the language we use in our country. If you're 51% Black owned, then you have a higher score than a company that has 25%. And therefore you stand a better chance if you're 51 to win, and then it progresses according to the various industries. But most of the countries, you don't necessarily have to have a local partner, but of course it's advisable. Because as we've mentioned, the regulatory environment, you need to know what you can and cannot do. There's cultural issues involved, which actually play the biggest role. And that could be the reason, Kevin, for example, why you gave an example of ShopRite, why they couldn't make it in that market. Tiger brands in South Africa also went into Nigeria and got burned, and Vodacom in South Africa also went to Nigeria and had some, legal battles there and all of that. So all of these things you can really overcome by making sure that you have partners that are credible. I don't think you should look for facilitators, which is a very common trend where someone is just running around putting deals together for other people. I think you need to find people who are actually in the business and who understands what's expected, and to give them, work with them to guide you through that local market. And then, of course, the import, part of your due diligence will obviously show you, what kind of permits you require to import and, certain things, because some things you can import or export without requiring, special permits. But in other things, like in minerals and wildlife and those kind of things, you need special permits for you to be able to transact there and so on. And I think then it becomes important, of course, in terms of how you tie up your agreement, right? And one of the key things in international transactions is what we call a choice of law in your agreement. So if you are entering into an international agreement, what law do you want to apply to your contract? Because you actually have an option, a choice of law, where you can decide. For example, Kevin, recently we one of our clients has called us urgently and said, listen, guys, we want to sign a deal, but this company says they want the laws of Australia to apply. And this deal is in Botswana,
Okay.
So, how do we do it? What happens then? I said to him, look, the general principle is that the law of the place where the transaction happens is the law that applies, right? Okay. So if you didn't choose any law, that's what would happen. But if you choose to say this contract will be, applied under the laws of South Africa, or under the laws of the United Kingdom, or under the laws of Australia, you actually have a choice to do that. And once you've done that, no other court will take your matter if it's not according to the agreement. So that's a very, very critical thing to consider when doing international transactions, so to speak. So I think in a nutshell, Kevin, I've spoken about the commercials, I've spoken about, the due diligence, the legal due diligence you'd have to do. I assume you would have already done the financial due diligence because you're a businessman and you're going into a deal. But the legal due diligence is where the wheels come off. And of course, I spoke about the culture, where you need to, align yourself with local people in the various economies. Make sure that you're actually dealing with real business people and not just fly-by-nights. And of course, to make sure that in tying up your agreement, you understand the choice of law and what type of laws you'd want to apply, to your contract, and so forth. I think if you have those at least as a basic stepping stone, Kevin, all else, becomes technical stuff that you need to deal during the course of your transaction. So in a nutshell, that would be my, advice of what to look at when you want to enter the African continent.
Okay. Wow, that's I'm glad I have you. So you're unpacking all these for us. Especially, I think that what you mentioned about with international trade and the agreement and legal side, and you need to make sure that these are all in place. I think that's very important. Okay, so I think that Ronny, thanks very much for your time this morning, and I think that we at least give the audience the opportunity to understand about the intra-Africa trade, where we are in terms of free FTA agreement, and also in terms of the opportunities on the continent, and also in terms of what are legal aspects one needs to be considering. And I just like to put your company's website address here, and your company name. I think that so if anyone's got any question, if you'd like to find out more about setting up business or doing business for the rest in the rest of Africa, and also that how to set up, can they consult you and contact you via your website?
Certainly, Kevin, and I'm even willing to give my email address if you allow me. That's just very simple: Ronny, RONNY @mkhwanazi.com. And yes, our firm is very experienced in cross-border transactions, and we would be delighted to assist anyone from anywhere around the world who would want to navigate the African market. Our 2025 strategy is to become the go-to law firm for African transactions, and we're looking forward to assisting whoever may need help. And yes, thank you as well, Kevin, for having me today. And of course, congratulations to you as well, on this wonderful work you're doing. When you started out, it started out like, it was a plaything, and I've seen how you've grown in it and taken it seriously. So congratulations on that as well, Kevin, and keep spreading the light.
Right. And Ronny, before I let you go, I just one more question. I thought that because I'm an advisor, so what's the opportunity in terms of investment, wealth management on the African continent, in terms of helping clients investing offshore? What's the I know it's probably quite a different sector, because it's not like a trade or like a manufacturing, but rather it's more the financial service sector. what's the outlook and the landscape in terms of Africa?
Look, I think it's quite huge. You know, if you think, just say, for example, you in terms of investments, and I know you specifically talking. Are you talking specifically about investments, or just from a asset management point of view, or more on the financial advisory point of view, as you're saying? I believe, Kevin, you know, even if it's all of those, that ultimately, I think in today's world, you know, collaboration is the new competition, right? And I believe that most of the African countries are still lagging behind in terms of financial services, not just in terms of, you know, the fintech itself, the actual, you know, pension funds and medical aids and all those kind of things. I really think there's a huge opportunity there. I think, you know, it's the best way to do it. I normally believe when you do cross-border, especially in services, is to identify players that you would be interested to align with. We do that as a firm. We've created many friendships on the continent, you know, with lawyers that, you know, otherwise wouldn't have met physically, so that we know that if we want something in that country, we can, you know, get in touch with a law firm that we've already have a relationship with, and all that. So I really think, Kev, that insofar as Africa is concerned, you have the youngest population, as you've said. All of these people need financial services in one way or another, and of course, fintech is going to be a biggest driver of that into the future. So I think your environment, you know, in a sense, can also leverage on fintech and try and create more opportunities on the continent, as well as alliances and so on. So yeah, I really believe, I actually, Kevin, I'm so excited about, you know, the possibilities and the things that we're still going to see, you know, happening in Africa. Because to me, most of the continent is almost like still brand new, you know? There's still a lot of things that needs to happen, whether it's investments or trades in goods and services, or, you know, infrastructure and all of that. I really think it's a good time for the continent. And as long as we can, you know, plug all the holes and make sure that business and government sit in the same room when talking to each other, I think there's a great future ahead. We may not be the ones to see the benefit of it, Kevin, but perhaps the generations that come after us will win, because we tried and set the foundation for them.
Okay. No, that's great. Thanks very much for those words. And I just want to conclude that for anyone out there, any business people that want to do business in Africa, that you need to have a knowledgeable partner, legal partner, and that's got a network that can help you on this continent. And who else to speak to Ronny Mkhwanazi and his team. So thanks very much. And I just like to wish everyone a good Friday and enjoy your weekend. Thanks. Until next time. Bye.
Thank you, Kevin.